Hey guys, it's Libby. New background. Yes, I have moved out of my condo into my parents' house while I attempt to sell the condo before I go join my beloved spouse in Amsterdam. I do have one more video that I filmed earlier, which will still be in the condo, so I get to see it one more time. I may seem kind of like pissed off in this video. It's not because I hate you. It's not because I hate the books. Well, I kind of hated one of the books. But it's because I'm dealing with a massive nightmare of shipping all of my things, and it's a long, convoluted, boring story. But let me just say, I have never genuinely threatened to sue someone before. So that should give you an idea of the mess that this whole move is. So this is my July wrap-up. I may have neglected to say that, but in July I listened to one audiobook. I DNF'd a book, and I read 7 plays, and only one of them was a Shakespeare. So let's start off with the book that I DNF'd. I'm not getting rid of it. I'm not like I'm never gonna finish it, but for now, I require convincing to continue with this. And that is A Natural History of Dragons, the first memoir of Lady Trent by Marie Brennan, which I know a lot of people on BookTube really love. And I'm like, oh man, is this soulless all over again? Am I the one person who does not like the fantasy of manners with the spunky heroine? I feel like I should like that. So I got to page 55, which I feel like is long enough to give you a notion of what it's going to be like. I was still sort of waiting for things to get moving, so like I would believe that it gets better. So if you read this and like this book, tell me if like after chapter 4 things start to get a lot better, or is it just the same as all the stuff that happens in chapters 1 through 4. So this is about a young, she starts off as a child when I first meet her. Her name is, I don't even remember her first name. Isabella. So Isabella lives in a sort of rather Victorian-inspired fantasy world where there are dragons. They're a bit of a rare creature, and she's super into dragons, but this is not a ladylike pursuit, study of science. Can't be having that in a woman's brain. It will get all scrambled. So she sort of has to like fight the system, man, and it's like really lazy feminism is mainly what I didn't like. I think that there was a real missed opportunity to have some more nuanced, less cliched character development. Isabella, in chapter 2 or so, blackmails one of the servants on her family's estate to disguise her as a boy and take her on this hunt to get rid of this dragon that's bothering people in the forest. They do this, they go see the dragon. She just wanted to look at the dragon, but of course this is a novel, so the dragon attacks them, but it's all very exciting. And then afterwards her mother finds out that she wants to go see this dragon and, you know, makes her stay inside and play the pianoforte and serve tea and all those depressing, oppressive Victorian things. And, you know, this is the impetus for her being sort of stuck for 2 years, not being able to study her dragons, having to grow up in this life that she's not comfortable with. But what should have happened is the boy who she had blackmailed, he is attacked by the dragon and is injured, but he ends up being fine. It would have been so much more interesting if he had been killed by the dragon, and like that's why Isabella sort of gave up on her dragon studies, because she realized that this thing she was interested in and her passion for it killed a kid. And then now she has some sort of internal conflict about like why, like, is this worth it? Is it worth it to get involved in this dangerous field where people who are nice to me can get hurt? That's so much better than tropey Victorian patriarchy stuff. And like, trust me, I don't mind feminism in books. Quite the opposite. I just don't like lazy and unmotivated feminism in books. So let me know if this gets better, if I should continue it. And then the next book that I read was an audiobook. It was The Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy. I gave this one its own review because Hardy, I love him. It's basically about a guy who destroys his own life, and I loved it. I gave it 4.5 stars. The next thing that I read was a play. It was the Shakespeare, and it was Richard II I have packed up all of my Yale editions, so this is my mom's complete works from college, and it's really heavy. I can't believe they made her carry it around to all her classes. So Richard II is probably my favorite Shakespeare play after Measure for Measure, so my second favorite Shakespeare play. I don't know about Hamlet, though. Hamlet's pretty good. It's really hard to think about Hamlet because of its place in our culture and sort of intellectual history. But I think I do like Richard II better. So this is one of his history plays. It's a bit more obscure, but, you know, it does get performed sometimes. And it's about Richard II. It's a tragedy. It's about Richard II, who was not a particularly good king, and he was deposed by his cousin, or he was usurped by his cousin, who became Henry IV, who Shakespeare wrote some plays about as well. I actually think that Richard II is a really good place to start if you want to read some of the history plays, because most of them have like a million different characters, and they're all like plotting and scheming against each other, and everyone gets referred to by their titles and not their names, and it's very confusing. In Richard II, you pretty much just need to keep track of two characters, Richard and Henry. But the reason this play is so great is twofold. One, the poetry. This is probably Shakespeare's best writing on like a line-by-line level. It's written entirely in verse. There's no prose. Everything is in meter. Which I think there were a couple of Shakespeare's plays that he did that for. Richard II, I believe, was the first one that is entirely poetry. So it's just, it's beautiful. In addition to being in verse, a fair bit of it is in rhyme. Now, the sort of hierarchy of loftiness of literary expression went prose. So normally you'll have like comic relief characters speaking in prose. The grave diggers in Hamlet speak in prose. Then blank verse, which is unrhymed lines of iambic pentameter. And then rhymed iambic pentameter was like super fancy. A lot of times Shakespeare will use rhymed iambic pentameter at the end of a scene to sort of draw everything to a close. You see that a lot in Hamlet and in Twelfth Night. But in Richard II, he uses rhyme more within the scenes, just like because everything that's happening is so important. Serious questions of kingship and like life. And also John of Gaunt. John of Gaunt is such a great character. He's Richard's uncle, and he's the father of Henry of Bolingbroke, Henry IV. So here's a little excellent bit from Act 1, Scene 3. This is when Richard has banished Henry for 10 years, and John of Gaunt is sad because even though it's a temporary banishment, he's old and he knows that he's going to die before his son can return to England. So Richard says, "Why, uncle, thou hast many years to live, but not a minute, king, that thou canst give. Shorten my days thou canst with sullen sorrow, and pluck nights from me, but not lend a morrow. Thou canst help time to furrow me with age, but stop no wrinkle in his pilgrimage. Thy word is current with him for my death, but dead, thy kingdom cannot buy my breath. Thy son is banished upon good advice, whereto thy tongue a party verdict gave. Why at our justice seem'st thou then to lour? Things sweet to taste prove in digestion sour." So I do love a witty comeback, and John of Gaunt has the best witty comebacks because he does it in rhyme. He sort of takes control of the sentence that Richard has said and uses it to construct his own sentence. And you'll actually notice that Richard drops the rhyming scheme in the lines, "Thy son is banished upon good advice, whereto thy tongue a party verdict gave." And then his next line is, "Why at our justice seem'st thou then to lour?" And then Gaunt says, "Oh, no. You're trying to make this insignificant, but this is important. I'm going back to the rhyme scheme. You taking my son from me demands rhymed verse." So the poetry is the first reason this play is great. The second reason this play is great is that the psychology is just like Shakespeare was really smart and understood humans really well. I don't know if you know this, guys. Newsflash. Shakespeare, good at human nature. So Richard, historically, the actual Richard II became king at a very young age, and so he didn't really have a proper socialization process. And he also really firmly believed in the divine right of kings. He was anointed by God, and the hand of man could not take away his right to rule. So seeing him struggle with the fact that, like, politically he can't be king anymore because Bolingbroke, like, has this giant army which is marching across England, is just completely fascinating. And then because he doesn't have, like, a normal outlet for social interaction, the people he does feel like he can interact with, he has really intense, intimate relationships with. So with his wife, with his cousin O'Merle, and also with his cousin Bolingbroke, they seem to really like each other, and Henry feels very uncomfortable with sort of taking the kingdom away from his cousin, his friend, and, like, the rightful king. Henry IV, I saw the play Henry IV Part 1, but I don't remember that much about it. Mainly it's about Henry V, actually, and Falstaff. But the actual Henry IV, later in his reign, was, like, blighted with a really disfiguring skin disease, and he saw this as, like, punishment from God for having deposed a king. So he's also a really interesting and sympathetic character, and it's kind of hard to figure out who to root for in all of this. Like, I think you're supposed to root for Henry because he's a better person. He doesn't, like, just randomly take people's stuff as Richard does. But he also doesn't really want this. So yeah, Richard II, really great, 10 out of 10, would recommend. Now, I spent too much time talking about Richard II, so I'm going to move fairly quickly through the last 6 plays that I read. I'm going to give them their own video. So I think I'm just going to tell you what they were, give you 1-sentence synopsis, and then my star rating, and then look forward to more videos about these plays. So I read 2 plays by Anton Chekhov. The first one was The Seagull, which is about art is hard. I gave it 5 stars. The second is The Cherry Orchard, which is basically about sometimes you are actually out of money and you have to sell your nice house. Like, and you can pretend that you don't, but you do. I gave it a sort of I gave it a 4. I think I gave it 4 stars. Then I read 4 plays by Henrik Ibsen. This is my copy of Ibsen. This is 4 plays, which are only 2 of which are the ones that I read from high school, because I read A Doll's House in high school, and I marked it up. I highlighted in pink all of the places where Torvald uses a pet name for Nora. So the first Ibsen that I read was An Enemy of the People, which is basically, fuck all y'all, I am right, I have science, everybody is a hypocrite. It's quite fun. The next one was A Doll's House, which is probably Ibsen's most famous play, and it's about sort of being oppressed by your husband in terms of, like, your identity and the role you can fill in the family. So, like, even if you're not being conventionally abused, there are other ways that you can be rendered really unhappy, and you should get out, even if it's hard. I gave The Doll's House 3.5, but I am aware that, like, most people like it more than me. Then I read Hedda Gabler, which is basically about a woman dealing with clinical depression, and she doesn't like anybody, so she manipulates them. And then the last one was Ghosts. I wasn't planning on reading this, but for reasons I'll explain in my Ibsen video, in order to understand An Enemy of the People, you really need to read Ghosts. And this play is about a woman dealing with the fact that her husband is dead, and he was a really terrible person, but nobody else knows that. Everyone else thinks he was great. And it's complicated family drama. It was really good. I gave it 5 stars. Thanks very much for watching, guys. I will see you soon.